Vivian Health. I'm the field marketing manager. We have a great webinar planned for you today. How to hire for healthcare under pressure, smarter tools and tactics to recruit full-time staff. We have a great panel today. We have Tim Needham. He's our SVP of Client Development. And we have Rachel Neal. She's our clinician advocate. And I will let Tim take it away.
Thank you, Victoria. Can you hear me okay?
You sound great.
Just a quick background on myself. Thank you all for joining. In my role, I really support the life cycle of all of our provider employers across the platform in terms of their recruiting effort. And Rachel, I'll let you give a little background on your role.
Sure, thank you. Well, I'm a nurse first, and I work in candidate operations as a clinician advocate here at Vivian.
Thanks, Rachel. So for those that are newer to Vivian Health from an awareness, just a quick background on the company. We have quietly become the largest healthcare only talent marketplace available to clinicians around the country. 1 in 4 nurses are on the platform today. We're accelerating our growth in terms of user base. Last month we actually had 80,000 nursing and allied health professionals that joined the platform, and it's a highly active user base on Vivian that we've got well over 100,000 people that apply to jobs directly to employers that are on the platform in a given month. And the reason I share this is it gives us a good deal of insight to a very large candidate base to do research on. It gives us pretty good insights into hiring trends in the industry. So our goal today, we're going to quickly cover a little bit of the backdrop on what we see going on in the industry. We're going to talk about the use of data to effectively match candidates and jobs and focus on some data that we have that's shown some high effectiveness to using data in the recruiting process. And then we'll wrap talking about some case studies, some wins, some losses, so to speak, some learnings that we've had mutually with our clients over the last year or so. So with that, I'll just do a little bit about the backdrop, what we're hearing and seeing. And we consider this a little bit of a triple threat, which is different than the pandemic. What we're hearing from our employers is the requisition count is still high, but the urgency is deflated a little bit. And I kind of use the analogy that the house is no longer on fire, but we have a skeleton crew now doing spot fires, right? So each week we may have different nursing units, different clinical units that are, looking at very specific roles that are really hotspots, hard to hire kind of roles. And then the next week that may go away and we shift somewhere else. So for the talent acquisition, leader, it's a lot of things to try to balance. For the recruiter, it's a lot of things to balance and a good swirl that's going on right now. The second piece of the backdrop are financial constraints. Almost universally, we're hearing chief financial officers ask the organization, especially relative to recruiting, to reduce the expense on vendor community, reduce the expense on bonuses and so forth. So that's working against the momentum here. And lastly, we talk about the candidate pool, and this is best described as candidates that are really tough to put a finger on. And some of our provider employers share that across their environment, they're seeing up to 20%. That's a little high, but some are seeing that high of candidates that will accept an offer and then either decline following or no show. And that's really a difficult element to put in the mix right now. So you put all these three together, it's not easy. It's gotten a little easier out there, but it's by no means easy. So on the topic of candidate, Rachel, I will kick it over to you.
Sounds great. Thanks, Tim. Well, when we circled back to what the candidates themselves are telling us about their hiring experience, we found that we're largely seeing 3 types of recruiter interactions. The first is transactional. Now, the transactional approach is essentially that one-way transfer of information. We might cover the job description, maybe a few salary and benefits, but that's really all that entails. Now, the next example is what we call feigned interest. This is where there might be a little bit more initial conversation about the candidate's qualifications for the role, but there really isn't that connection into what the role has to offer that specific candidate and how it might match up with their professional goals. Now, whereas when we look at the third example, that insightful experience, this is when the recruiter is able to engage that candidate with a focus on what their professional goals are and determine how this particular role might fit with their career journey. Now, this is super important because the candidate feels prepared to move on to that final next step of interviews with the hiring manager, and they can truly demonstrate their competency. Next slide, please. Now, knowing, of course, that the ideal state is to be able to have these insightful type experiences for all of our candidates to really drive qualified and intentful applicants to a successful placement. We really want more time focused on those high value activities that drive engagement and less time on low value tasks. In that initial identification of job needs, we want talent acquisition professionals to be able to have a real conversation with the hiring manager on the knowledge, skills, and abilities that translate into a successful hire. We really want to move away from sending out blind proposals to lists of unvetted leads. As a side note, healthcare professionals are currently being inundated with these blind proposals, and it's ultimately leading to what we call in the industry as alarm fatigue, so to speak. So really shifting our focus into screening candidates based on higher level critical thinking assessments, and then being able to connect with them in a timely fashion. Another key high value activity is really setting up those candidates for success with meaningful candidate prep calls where we can share holistic details that the candidate can take with them into the hiring manager interview. And then finally, being able to close that feedback loop with the candidate when an interview is done, and even reallocating those candidates to maybe another particular role if that one wasn't a good fit, but they could still use their strengths in another part of the organization. Next slide. So in the clinical practice environment these days, our priority is really enabling workflows to assist clinical teams to work at the top of their scope. And that particular model translates into talent acquisitions as well. The key opportunities in automation that we have identified means technology can tackle those low value tasks and free up our TA teams to connect with candidates in ways that drive higher value and support candidate engagement. I'm going to hand it back to Tim, and he's going to give us some great new details of how the Vivian platform model uses technology to drive successful hires.
Thanks, Rachel. Appreciate it. So I think it's probably not terribly exciting news to say, we really want our recruiting teams to be focused on higher value activities, but we continue to see the how being very difficult. And one of the things I'll talk through is really what it means to do intelligent matching of candidates and recruiters. And we're not here to talk about artificial intelligence today, but we are here to talk about machine learning algorithms and data collection from the candidates, data collection on the jobs, and so forth. So what this is going to entail, and this is the challenge I think for the industry, is a pretty wholesale shift. We have been groomed and trained to think about optimize for volume, right? We need more hiring, we need more candidate flow. It's all about top end of the funnel. We're focused heavily on cost per click optimization, maximizing our exposure to jobs. And this really does feed the environment of, the Indeeds, the ZipRecruiters, our CRMs. It's all about this massive data. And what we're going to propose here is there are ways to optimize for hiring. And this is where you have an opportunity to gain some efficiencies within your team. It's going to take a tighter focus on data. It's going to take into account timing. And if I can go back to Rachel, what you said there, the constant barrage of input of outreaches really causes our clinicians to shut down and treat every phone call, every text the same. And they're looking for more. They're looking for something customized to them. So that's what we're talking about here. What we've learned over our history as a business, which is going on about 6 years now, working with clinicians and the clinical audience, is there's really 3 key pieces to intelligence and how we connect candidates to jobs. And the first is the candidate's stated intentions. And this is not a resume. This is actually taking the candidate and having them give a significant level of detail about their clinical practice history, about their desires and where they want to be. Think about someone who's able to share down to the shift structure, the compensation targets, the type of environment they want to work in, capture all of that information. Again, not on a resume or a phone call, but actually on the platform that now gives us data that we can work with, pieces of that candidate that we can assess. The second, I'll call it like a 3-legged stool. I'm going down the path here. The second is the observed intentions. And this is not what the candidates tell us in their profile. It's what the candidates tell us by what they're doing. And, one easy analogy is if we have a candidate that we know lives in Denver, but they're searching jobs in Chicago, really what should we be presenting, right? If they're doing all their searching in Chicago, then Chicago job is what they get. We should ignore their home address. Third piece, and this is what we've learned is really underdeveloped in the industry, is jobs. And I was actually presenting and hosting a session at a conference, an HR conference earlier this week, similar topics, and asked a room of 40, 50 HR leaders their confidence that their job feeds, the way they present their jobs, has any degree of standardization to it, and not a single hand went up, right? Because we allow departments to create their own job recs. We don't coach on standard data sets, standard approaches to how we term things, and you end up with this just like mush of information that then has to be dealt with by whoever's processing them and handling the candidates. And so what we've learned is when we onboard providers to our organization, we do take all of that job information and we spend a good deal of time. We put clinical eyes on it, we put engineering resources eyes on it, and really take that unstandardized information and get it into something that's workable and that we can search on. We can allow the candidate to search on it. We can run machine learning algorithms on it. And the payback you get is a really effective job alert system where we can use push notifications on our mobile application to deliver the right job to the right candidate. And here's the kicker, at the right time, right? When we know they're looking, we know that they're likely to respond and likely to convert to a hire. So I'm going to revisit a little bit before I move on. I'll talk about how effective that model can be here in just a moment, but I want to just summarize back in some of the things that Rachel covered. That again, today we look at blind proposing as a low value activity, low strike rate. It's what we coach our sourcing teams to do. I get it. It's everyone's asking for, I want to try. That's absolutely needs to be a part of the industry, but we have an opportunity to reduce the reliance on that with highly targeted job alerts. Declining unqualified candidates. Our model on our platform includes an automated screening of the candidate's profile, automated screening upon application, and we see anywhere from 80 to 90% reduction in candidates that would have been screened out by a recruiter is done in an automated fashion before it ever hits the recruiter. Collecting documentation, again, while resume may rule, we know there's more than that required. So our job on the front end is to collect enough data about the candidate, their active licensure, yes, their resume, their work history, in a way that we can get that over into the ATS and use that profile usefully. So this is the path. So regardless where you're going in terms of vendor technology, we highly encourage a focus on these as the key things for automation. Now, let's talk about how impactful specifically that data structure and that job alert program can be. We look back at the data I'll share. It covers all of the permanent staff hiring that's happened through our platform this calendar year, since January. And we asked the question, if an application comes via a job alert that was delivered to a candidate, can we benchmark that in terms of likelihood to hire, to become an employee, compared to jobs that we find out on, call it the Indeeds, as ZipRecruiters, the job board community of the world, the 400 some odd places you can post a job. And here's what we found, that actually an application that comes from a job alert is 66% more likely to turn into a hire than application that comes from more of the spray and pray strategy. So this is great. I don't think it's, from our end, it's not terribly surprising, but this is something that's improving over time. And, we're getting pretty close to thinking that an application coming through one of our job alerts is twice as efficient as an application that comes through elsewhere. Again, if we're optimizing for hiring. So the more interesting thing I think we did was we looked at the data and we said, well, what if we compare it to candidates doing their own search on the Vivian platform and think about the value of an application coming from a job alert response to an application coming from a candidate's own filtered search. What we found is that the job alert is still more effective. So this is impactful for us. And I think at the end of the day, it really is what we brought to bear here is a curated mobile experience, much the same way folks expect from social media partners, YouTube, et cetera. So highly effective. And again, if we want to talk about pointing our recruiting teams in the right direction, this type of effective candidate matching has to be a piece of the puzzle. Now, I'm going to jump into 3 different case studies, just kind of move through them quickly. And then after the case studies, we'll wrap up and we'll go to Q&A. So I'll start first. Here we have an academic-based health system, fairly recent pilot program for us. Challenges, they were still in a situation with RN exits being greater than hires. The chief nursing officer shared that even 2 to 3 a month were going to be impactful for their team. the engagement started in May. One of the key things that I'll visit in the recap is the client had asked that we sent screened candidates to their sourcers. And we had asked for a direct to recruiter, and they asked us to align to the existing model where all external sourced candidates come in through this small team of sourcers. The scope of the pilot we ran through August, we were trying to get 5 to 8 hires at minimum, and then really serve as a process assessment. So results, huge amount of applications in a very brief period of time. Nearly 3,000 unique candidates we were able to activate through the job alert program. The 181 candidates moved to the client. You're seeing a screening process that drastically reduces the noise for the recruiters. We only had 5 hires, and that amounts to about 3% of screened candidates. That's low. We typically would see 8 to 12%, somewhere in that range. So I do present this case study with an awareness that we had some successes here and some failures. And the successes were really on the activation of the candidates, the screening out a lot of the noise. But what we learned was in this case, we didn't do a really good job of assessing the bandwidth of the sourcing team. And by aligning to the client model, we added to an already overwhelmed stack of challenges for the sourcing team. And what resulted was, and this is horrible to read, an average response time to candidate was over 10 days. And we all know there's no way you're going to retain candidates there. And what was happening is the candidates were being held in a queue, batched up, and then one afternoon, the sourcers would take and they would shove them all to recruiters. But that gap between application and recruiter timeline killed us. So we think at minimum, we probably lost 10 to 15 hires to the project. So that's certainly something, if we, when we relight up here, it'll be direct to recruiter. So tough lessons, but lessons nonetheless. I'll jump next to a case study. This organization is focused on behavioral health. So a little unique here, a facility spread around large geographies. And their challenge really coming into the project was identifying specialty nurses, because they didn't want the noise of folks coming to later in the interview process and deciding behavioral health wasn't for them. So they really wanted folks that had established experience in behavioral health. And they were looking for both RN and LPN roles. And really didn't want the recruiters, they wanted to spend as little time as possible doing cold outreach, because they're looking for a fairly niche type of role. So we started the project in May, about 65 jobs on the platform, spread across 20 states. We kicked off the job alert program. They had a recruiting team of 3, and the pilot ran through August. What we found was, this was really exciting. They actually made 21 hires in a 3-month period of time, which the client was extremely happy about. The cost per hire you can see here is super low. Our pilot program is unlimited hiring for 90 days. So it's a fixed subscription, unlimited hiring, and we have transparency to candidate cost after. But this is a situation where the client saw immediate benefit from very low cost of hire and high volume compared to what they expected. And then the key here, 0 outbound proposals. So all of this candidate volume was driven by Vivian's job alert program and engaging candidates through the mobile application on a weekly, every 3 days, whatever the routine was we decided by that candidate they responded best to, get those job alerts out there. And let's see, we'll go to number 3, just to recap this one. So not a whole lot of what's next, other than we are expanding jobs and roles. And what we did learn was that the job alert program was able to take the candidate profile and look for that behavioral health. The screening before the candidate could apply to make sure that they had behavioral health validated was certainly helpful for their team, and have some strong supporters in the recruiting team that they've been really happy with it. I'll wrap with a bit more of a volume-based case study, since this is a larger provider with facilities across Texas and Florida. Challenges back in 2022 were, a decent number of turnover. Still have a good deal of agency spend we were trying to reduce. So this is a bit more longer-term relationship for us. Began in fall of 2022, and the scope and goals here really are established, consistent hiring goals, not just focus on a pilot. From a result standpoint, we've got 114 hires made by the system. What the graph in the middle shows is the darker green bar is the number of candidates that got through Vivian's screening process. The medium green bar are the numbers of hiring manager interviews that took place, meaning recruiters screened out additional. And then the lighter green bar is the number of hires, and I'll call out that 43 is just through the end of August. So we've still got, definitely room to move. I expect we'll be somewhere in the 65, 70 hires this quarter. Behind this data are roughly 8,000 candidates that we were able to engage with initially and get interest in the job applications, and then the screening process boiled us down to these numbers that made for a highly efficient experience for the recruiting team. So you'll see the data here on the right. 1 out of 5 candidates that the recruiting team even saw in their inbox became a hire. Never mind who they engaged with. 1 out of 5 that they saw in their inbox became a hire of the health system. And then from a hiring manager standpoint, I'll again reflect back to Rachel, your comments around engaging recruiters with hiring managers, understanding the environment. I mean, there is no better way to build trust between talent acquisition and a hiring manager than be really respectful of the hiring manager's time. And in this case, we're nearly 1 out of 2 hiring manager interviews became employees. So a really, really great story here. Thankful for, what we learned out of this one. What we find here is the collaboration, getting down to the hospital, to the unit level, and understanding the needs, being able to look at rapid response, in this case, counterpoint to our prior case study. Application to hiring manager is under 5 days, in terms of getting those scheduled and activated. And then the opportunity next is we have added health to the mix here and expanded focus. So I'm going to wrap there. I did want to focus that the screening model we have, I'll quickly cover. When you're onboarding to Vivian, we basically use either job scraping or a job feed, whatever's available, but we really own the process for the clinical eyes and the engineering eyes of getting the jobs onto the Vivian platform. And then our model takes over. While we do allow outbound proposing on the platform, we focus heavily on job alert activation, our automated screening process. And then once the candidate clears that screening process, they land in via email alert and an inbox on our platform for the recruiter. And the recruiter takes it from there and engages. So we're not competing with the ATS and the candidate management. We're really focused on highly effective candidate delivery up front. With that, I will kick it back to Victoria and see if we have any questions out there we want to run through.
Thank you, Tim. Okay, let's jump into Q&A. So first things first, Tim, question from the audience is, does Vivian do their own recruiting? I noticed in the first case study, the hospital is working directly with Vivian rather than with an agency. Did I understand this correctly?
Thanks for the question. For clarity, Vivian is a talent marketplace. We are more akin to the Indeed model. So think of us like a healthcare specific ground up model of Indeed. We do not do any active recruiting, meaning we don't employ recruiters. We are not a direct employer of any of the folks on our platform. So either healthcare providers or staffing agencies are equal parts users of the platform, much like they are with other tools in the industry. But I hope that clarifies. We're not a recruiting firm in any way. We're just, our job is to be able to be that marketplace to connect the recruiter and the candidate.
Perfect. Thank you. Next question, is the Vivian screening tool a new feature being added to Vivian?
That's a good question. Rachel, can I talk about historically what we've approached with our clinician advocate team in screening, and then I'll talk about that we've introduced some automation back in the spring that we've seen highly effective. But Rachel, I'll kick it to you to start.
Yeah, well, kind of circling back to that, being able to reduce some of the noise for recruiters, our clinician advocate team is able to really zero in on one-on-one calls with candidates and be able to kind of triage them into the right type of roles that work for them. A candidate might apply for a role, and then we are sort of just circling back with them to make sure that we're meeting the needs of the facility as well as what the hiring teams have told us that they want. So it's almost like a level up. So you have the technology first, but then the clinician advocate model enables clinical type interactions with candidates and enables them to be able to kind of get into the right role that might be a good fit for them. So you're kind of getting the best of both worlds, a little bit of the technology screening part, but also getting that human connection with a clinician advocate who can help screen them. And again, reducing that noise for the recruiter. So when they come to the talent acquisition team, they kind of have a really good, solid idea of this candidate being a good fit.
And thank you, Rachel. And I'll emphasize we have clients that use the platform with no screening and absorb 100% of the inbound applications. We have a delivery model where we're doing just the automated screening part, which is heavily focused on speed for the recruiter. So, within seconds of the candidate applying, they're fully screened and then head over to the recruiter. And then we have Rachel's team that's kind of a third service level where we see a lot of customized needs, and we have clients that are really sensitive to clearing out significant amounts of noise. So we can level that up, but that sweet spot in the middle of that automated screening, that is in place also for our clinician advocate model. That's really one of the things that eliminates a lot of the noise for recruiters under either model.
All right, thank you. Next question, when was the candidate survey conducted?
It's a cumulative effect. We have a user experience team that never stops. They don't have any other role in the organization other than to consistently meet with, survey, capture data from candidates and from recruiters that use the platform. We do actually a monthly all hands, and it's interesting. Every time we get together as an organization, our meetings are kicked off by that team presenting video captures from interviews of candidates, and it really grounds the organization. So we do have a formal study that we do between January and February every year that we call the State of the Healthcare Workforce. The data we presented here today is really the model that we built over an accumulation of candidate interviews, categorizing for us that desired experience with recruiters, versus some of the experiences they have that are a little bit less positive.
And I did want to add on there, part of our user experience team, we do have a nurse who is one of our researchers. So this nurse is able to engage one-on-one with all of our clinicians and really helps to be able to make them feel comfortable with sharing all of their feedback, which is huge for us in being able to drive that user experience.
Yeah, thank you, Rachel. And I'll add too, I don't know how much you've really focused on this, but the business started focused on nursing, but really about probably 4 years ago, we began looking at allied health professionals, and that obviously opens up a wide variety of different role types. And today, allied health's about 25% of folks that join the platform so far this year, as an example. And it does mirror something we're seeing in the industry, which is I talked initially about the urgency dropping out of recruiting to some extent. That may be true on a macro level. What we've seen is nursing, we've lost some of that urgency, but allied health demand has increased dramatically over the last 4 to 5 months. So we routinely now see organizations that will come to us and say, hey, nursing's great, but where I really need help is in therapy and tech roles and so forth. So I think that's going to be our future for quite some time here. The labor shortage is real and it's extended. There's no short-term fix here. So in the meantime, we're going to be playing some whack-a-mole and just really focusing on whatever the needs are at the moment. Back to you, Victoria.
All right, and we have another question from the audience. How much does Vivian charge from agency per month and per candidate if they receive the offer?
That's a good question. I won't throw prices out there right now, but I'll share we have 2 different models, and one we have that's based on like a subscription and candidate flow. And for providers, that would be like a screened candidate typically that we've gone through that exercise with. And then we have our larger organizations have access to what we call a success-based or per hire based model, where there's no cost incurred unless someone's hired. Under either situation, what we always on board is we bring any employer on with a fixed timeline, a 3-month pilot. And on the provider side, we provide unlimited hiring or perm staff roles. And the whole goal of that is then at the end of the pilot for the organization to look back. Either model may make sense depending on the ability to convert. If a high volume of candidates are converted, we talked about the behavioral health example of that organization, very high conversion rates, highly effective recruiting team. It's to their advantage to stay on more of a subscription candidate-based model. And for an organization that has low conversion but high volume of hires over time, the per hire based model may make more sense for them. So that's really the goal of the pilot, is to dial in, figure out what the best model is.
Thank you, Tim. All really great questions. If you guys haven't had a chance to add your question, feel free to do so now. And if not, we will send you on your way. Have a great day, everyone. And we will be following up after the webinar with the recording. Thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye. Thank you.